The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this discussion on M&A in the engineering software market. I'm Peter Thorne, and I'm here with David Land, a colleague at Cambashi. Cambashi is an industry analyst firm that's been in business for over 30 years now. I'd like to say the picture here is a view from our office window, but that wouldn't be true. We're down near a street level. This rooftop view is somewhere above us in Cambridge in the UK. Our business model is based on research in our domain of engineering software. For us, engineering software is an application software type paid for by R&D or engineering or technical budgets, and it's used to create products and services. From our research, we capture two types of information: quantitative data, shown here on the left, and qualitative data on the right. These are the two data assets which support two of our business lines. On the left, we have our market data business, where the focus is market size, growth, market opportunity. On the right, we have a training business, and this is where the focus is licensable web-based training and online wikis of industry information. We also use our data assets in the consulting and advisory business line. But these three business lines share the goal you can see in the top bubble. It's to help our clients develop and implement successful plans and strategies. So today's session is based on research that I would place about here. We track M&A to keep our quantitative models up to date. There's also a technique that's relevant to this, I think, that we use in strategy projects. This is where we work with our client to identify three alternative strategies in relation to a topic. The three strategy types we look for are aggressive, middle of the road, and business as usual. It's not at all unusual for an aggressive strategy to involve an acquisition. Having said that, there's no doubt that for some companies, acquisition is business as usual. Now, in projects connected to M&A, we can help map out market landscapes, we can do market and commercial appraisal of plans, but we don't do hands-on due diligence. And that's where I must try and keep the lawyers happy with a disclaimer. There is no warranty of completeness or correctness with any of the information that we'll provide today. We do our best, but you must treat our comments as estimates and opinions. We're going to be planning to have a little time at the end for Q&A. If you want to ask a question, find the question box in the webinar session window. You can type in a question at any time. If we don't get to your question today, we'll email you during the next couple of days. Okay, let's get back to M&A. So we can start by looking at the players. M&A needs sellers and buyers. But behind the scenes, and sometimes center stage, there are investors. For Cambashi, in our industry analysis, marketing and strategy space, the investors we're talking about are those who are trying to make their return by finding ways to grow revenue and profit. They have many things in common with sales and marketing managers. They want to identify market opportunities. They want to find ways for companies to be successful. So for today, if we say investor, we're giving a cold shoulder and excluding the organizations that seek a percentage of a transaction as a fee for their M&A support services. And we're also excluding traders. So let's try and put M&A in context and switch from engineering software to all industries. 2015 was a big year. The UK-based Financial Times reported 2015 as a new record M&A headline total. They quoted figures from financial research source Dealogic, and here they are: 4.62 trillion, beating 2007's 4.61 trillion US dollars. Also, according to the FT, using data from Deloitte, the savings promised by management in these deals was also at a record level. Here it is, $150 to $200 billion. But the cost of the deals, using some assumptions to spread the costs out over 10 years, these costs seem to be a bit more than the savings. So I think the lesson is that M&A must be about more than costs and savings. In this session, we're not going to try and boil the ocean. We're going to look at Cambashi's focus sector, that's engineering software. And we're going to look at the last few years to see if any M&A patterns emerge. When I've completed this introduction, I'm going to bring in my colleague David, who will take us through his analysis of engineering software deals by some of the companies in the market. We'll round things off with some comments about what we see in the data. But first, a few more comments to set the scene. Let me try and summarize the forces in play. We're going to exclude the financial reasons for M&A, even though these are big and important. We want to focus on the way M&A overlaps objectives such as vision for products, vision for service capabilities, ideas for sales coverage, ways of achieving competitive advantage, these sorts of things. The typical line of business P&L issues, not the corporate level of shareholder return. So we're going to put finance in the background and look at other drivers from the point of view of the players. So from the point of view of acquirers, they're using M&A to take the next step faster. That might be something to do with a value proposition. It might be filling a gap in the offer. It might be developing the offer. If you look at sellers, in some ways, it is sellers who create the opportunity. They're the ones that make the asset available and look for buyers who provide a good exit. Now, for a fruitful discussion between buyers and the acquirer needs to be a little bit flexible because there's never a perfect fit. But there's no doubt it can be the seller's initiative that gets things started. The acquirer considers the opportunity and thinks, yes, we could make that fit. I've already mentioned the type of investors that we're talking about here. They always have an investment framework. This defines the way that they're going to balance their portfolio. It might mean that they're looking for specific opportunities, for example, startups, or perhaps companies in a growth phase. Or they may have a bigger picture investment strategy, such as consolidation of a sector that they perceive to be fragmented. And of course, they're always looking for a good price. So, and this can mean looking for underperforming companies and organizations in cases where the investor believes that they can somehow add the ingredients needed to improve performance. So I'll remove finance from the picture. We're treating that as out of scope. And that's probably the right point to hand over to my colleague David Land, because David's going to look at the track record of some engineering software providers and see what these forces have actually delivered in the marketplace. So, David, it's all yours.
Thanks, Peter. The analysis I'm going to use is very simple. It's just a case of counting the number of acquisitions made by each company each year, then adding up the total value and then looking for a pattern. So here's the general framework. We have a number of deals on the vertical axis and years on the horizontal axis. The example circle here shows 7 deals in 2011, and the size of the circle gives the total value of the 7 deals combined. The data is based on publicly reported information and estimates available pre-acquisition, which we have found while researching for our Cambashi product observatory. We're going to look at 6 providers in particular. They are all well-known software companies, and they have been chosen purely on interesting M&A profiles and nothing to do with their position or growth in the market. If I'm being honest, we're looking at public companies because the information by definition is more open And also, we're only really looking at 6 companies because the chart could become very chaotic very quickly if we had many more. When this chart was originally created, we used dash circles for 2015 as complete information wasn't available at the time. So as we work through each of the providers, then at the end we'll try and do a summary with the updated 2015 from the original chart. So let's start adding those providers to the chart. Right, so starting with Autodesk here in the green circles, we have seen they've gone down the route of acquiring more smaller companies, primarily for technology and knowledge asset acquisition. Being so many, I won't try and mention them all, as I could probably spend most of the webinar just on Autodesk, but the chart does support the approach of trying to complete their overall offer and move towards the cloud. For example, Autodesk acquired DataStay in 2011, adding another component to help create Autodesk PLM 360. In 2013, they acquired advanced steel and concrete product lines from Greytech, and they were added into the AEC segment. And in 2014, they acquired the Gola cloud visualization platform for around $60 million, and BitSquid, which has now become Stingray, cementing their position in the games industry. On top of all of this, they do some larger acquisitions every now and then, like Delcam in 2014 for around $286 million. And that has helped expand their user base within the manufacturing segment. Moving to Dassault Systemes here in the blue circles, they have acquired fewer companies, but have spent more doing this and have the largest average deal size of the selected providers. This is a clear sign of their strategic goal of trying to double their addressable market by expanding into new sectors and requiring some sizable acquisitions to do this. For example, they bought Gemcom, which is now their Giavia brand, in 2012 for around $360 million, and Acceleris, now the Biovia brand, in 2014 for roughly $750 million. Their portfolio in established markets is strong and largely driven by internal technology developments, so limiting the need really for smaller technology and skill-based acquisitions. But they have done some of these through the Simulia brand, in particular with acquisitions of Simpo, SFE and Simpac. Now here in the yellow circles we have PTC, who have focused their acquisition strategy relating to the Internet of Things IoT market, starting with MKS in 2011, which they bought for around $292.5 million in the ALM space. They have now had further acquisitions in 2013 and 14 for Exeda, Atigo and ThingWorx. This puts PTC second only to Dassault in terms of the average deal size during the period of what the chart is based. This is both a technology grab and an early market share play within the IoT sector. They've also made some other acquisitions in different areas. In 2012, they spent $220 million on Servigistics. The Servigistics software portfolio includes service parts planning, manufacturing management and pricing, field service management, repairs management, and service knowledge management. And then in 2015, they acquired ColdLight, mainly for ColdLight's neuron automated predictive analysis platform to enrich their PTC's technology portfolio and extend their position in the Internet of Things market, and Vuforia in November 2015 for the augmented reality platform. And we've noticed that PTC aren't alone in this market in trying to expand into IoT. Dassault have spent money on GeneSoft in 2010, Ansys on Estrel in 2012, Siemens PLM on Polarion in 2015, and also Autodesk on C-Control in 2015. Right, we now have Ansys here in the orange circles, who have had some large acquisitions involving Fluent in 2006 and Ansoft in 2008. But if we're focusing just on the areas within this chart, the large acquisition starts with Apache in 2011 for $314 million. They bought, as mentioned before, they bought Estrel in 2012 for around 42 million euros. helping them with expanding into the embedded related market. In 2013, they acquired Even, a provider of composite analysis and optimization technology relying on cloud computing. And in 2014, they acquired Reaction Design, a chemistry simulation software company, and spent around $85 million on SpaceClaim, a leading developer in 3D modeling software. Nemetschek in the purple circles have completed, again, many acquisitions before the period of this chart, acquiring then developing these into brands such as Gravasoft, Maxon, Vectorworks and Skier as part of a longer term strategy in developing their wider BIM offerings. Within this particular chart, you can see the acquisitions for DataStay in 2013, Bluebeam in 2014 for $100 million, and Celebri in 2015 for around 32 million euros. The acquisition of Bluebeam has also had a significant impact on the group's revenue in the US as it continues to indicate a need for growth further beyond their established base within EMEA, and particularly in Germany. And finally, we have Trimble here in the red circles. The data here might be slightly misleading as they've been acquiring many companies across their portfolio, and we couldn't necessarily identify all of them as either software companies. So there could be some misleading terms in the actual number, but most of them were software from what we've been able to find. But however, it's still a very comprehensive and impressive list of the amount of acquisitions they've made over this period. I'll rattle off a couple of them. So Meridian Systems, AceCAD, PlanCal, CSC, and recently Vernova. But for me, the two more interesting ones are Tekla in 2011 for around 337 million euros in 2011 for Tekla, and that's only recently now transitioning into the Trimble brand away from being called Tekla again. And the other interesting one was SketchUp, being freeware usage and bought from Google. But with all of these acquisitions, they've decided to basically expand their engineering and construction business segment to create the design, build and operate platform. Okay, as I mentioned in the 2015 segments, we've got dashed numbers for what were original estimates when these charts were set up. So what I'm going to do is now click onto the next chart, which should give us the actual or closer to 2015 with what information we've been able to update it with the most recent annual reports since then. So looking at this, we can see that the chart has moved around a little bit. And what I'm going to do is go through in a few, basically picking some details and points of interest of some of these changes based on what happened. So with PTC, in addition to Cold Light and Vuforia being acquired in 2015, they've actually signed, they signed an agreement in December, so I think the completion of this has now been in January, for a company called Kepware, of which they've spent 100 million upfront plus $18 million based on financial results on it. The company provides communications and connectivity to industrial automation environments. With Autodesk, they acquired NetFab, a German-based provider of industrial-grade additive manufacturing software solutions, and they spent around $42.5 million on them. Autodesk also completed several other business combination and technology acquisitions during 2015 at an amount spent of just over $100 million. Dassault Systems acquisitions totaled 20.2 million euros in 2015. This was mainly on expanding CATIA's capabilities in complex mechatronic system engineering by acquiring Modelon, an expert in ready-to-use content for system modelling and simulation, which are strategic for transportation and mobility industry. Ansys spent $49.7 million on acquisitions through 2015. This was more on assets and companies, not just companies. So they bought the assets from Numerical Technologies International, a developer of in-flight icing and simulation software associated with design, testing, and certification services, for around $10.5 million. They also bought Gear Design, provider of big data analytics, and the assets of Delcross, a developer in computational electromagnetic simulation and radio frequency system analysis software. As mentioned before, Nemetschek bought Celebri in 2015, but the results will only go into as of the 1st of January 2016. The more interesting part from this bit was they also announced that they were selling off a 70% interest in Glasser for around €2 million. And finally, Trimble acquired Vianova Systems, a Norwegian company specialising in building information software for infrastructure design software solutions across the European region, and this will end up in the Trimble's connected site portfolio. We have selected some of the most active providers in this analysis, but there are several other significant players in the market who we feel we needed to mention about during this period. Siemens PLM, for example, continue to make significant progress in their portfolio through both small and large deals such as LMS, VistaG and Camstar, and more recently Polarion Software. And although outside the boundary of this chart, I feel that we ought to comment about what happened in January this year with Siemens announcing their intention to buy US-based simulation software provider CD Adapco for around $970 million. That company will end up in Siemens' digital factory division alongside the existing industrial software and factory automation portfolio. Hexagon have also acquired many companies over this period, with Intergraph and Various Software being two very large acquisitions that predominantly play within this engineering software area. But they've also made some smaller ones along the way to help out with that. Arguably, the other largest acquisition news of this year was the Aviva Schneider deal really not happening. Both companies had agreed a deal in July in which Schneider was to buy £550 million of new Aviva shares for a 53.5% stake, and combined with the Aviva's business with Schneider's software division. The agreement would have effectively worked out like a reverse takeover of Aviva. But the two companies have mutually agreed that the proposed deal was unworkable, and so it didn't happen. And now I'll hand back to you, Peter.
David, thanks. It's great to see the data pulled together, not only as a list, but quantified as well. Let's think about some interpretations. So I think we should look at the same data, but it's shown in a different way. So, new chart, but for the same data. The vertical axis is the annual total transaction value, but this time as a percentage of the acquirer's revenue. So higher up the page means a bigger acquisition as a proportion of the buyer's size. And the horizontal axis is the number of transactions during the year. Each company gives us one data point for each year we're looking at. So let's add some data. Here it is. This is the data for all 6 of those companies that were on the previous chart. I'm going to divide this up into segments. When we developed this segmentation, I'll admit that David and I were using our knowledge of the data behind these points on the chart. It wasn't just a numerical exercise. Our first region on the chart is for transactions where the acquirer is mainly exploring new technologies, the technologies and market segments that are new to that company. These are small acquisitions when compared to the acquirer. There may be several or many per year. Up at the top left, these are the big, bold transformations. The total spend in a year is a significant percentage of the acquirer's revenue, and it only needs one or a few transactions to reach this total. This section at the top right involves quite a high number of transactions to spend a high percentage of revenue. So we call this the big measured transformation section. We believe the acquirers have a specific strategic goal in sight. The transformation is in progress. These acquisitions fit the strategy. Now there's a sector out here on the right. Beyond and below this data sample, these are typically big company acquirers which in effect outsource some of their R&D to external entrepreneurs. So rather than spend on in-house R&D, the acquirers watch what the entrepreneurs do, then use the budget they've saved to buy the interesting results. But we don't have any of these in this particular sample. So that leaves us with the group in the middle. There are at least two things going on here. One is to grow the footprint of the business by acquiring companies that are in adjacent sectors. The other looks more systematic, to buy 10 or 20 companies per year. So let's identify the companies and see if this helps explain the pattern. Here they are. These are the same companies and years that we looked at before. So you can see in the big bold transformations, we've got PTC in bright yellow, down at the base of the big bold region. 3 years of substantial acquisitions, creating its Internet of Things business. Dassault, that's the blue markers, is in there for 2 years, which matches their strategy to double the addressable market. Big acquisitions are the natural way to make this change. And we've got one each from Ansys, Nemetschek, and Trimble. I should point out a green marker. It's Autodesk. And over on the right-hand side, at the base of the big measured transformation. If the Delcam acquisition that year had been its only transaction, then that green dot would have been in the big bold sector. But it acquired another 20 companies or so that year. Siemens isn't in the group we selected, but David mentioned CD Adapco earlier, and that would indeed, be a transfer, an acquisition that would have that would fit into the big bold transformation part. But I suppose for business headlines and financial reporting, it really is this group of the big acquisitions, the transformational acquisitions that really gain media attention. But there are many examples where small technology acquisitions have a big impact on product lines. One example is Ansys. It's done both big acquisitions. David, you mentioned Ansoft. More recently, and you also mentioned Estorel, the smaller acquisitions. But it was Estorel that's provided the technology from which Ansys is now adding software to its simulations of mechatronic devices, which of course is a significant step in simulation. I mentioned earlier that David and I had a look behind these particular dots to individual transactions to develop this analysis, and this also triggered a hypothesis. And here is our hypothesis. The sample had a small number of cases that looked to us as if after a big bold acquisition year, the same company can have 2 or 3 years of fill the gaps type transactions. The data isn't conclusive, but there's a kind of common sense logic that says you may well need to make a follow-up acquisition to build links from the existing customer base or the existing product set and actually bring your acquisition into the family, integrate, connect, and use. Our fill the gaps label could be a bit conservative. Perhaps maintain or possibly even build the growth momentum would be fair. And I suspect when looking at these smaller fill the gaps transactions, the acquisition teams in a corporate development group would see it much more as build the growth momentum. So, do these patterns help predict what will happen next? The answer is yes, but only in very broad terms. There's always a balance between the acquirer's strategy and the opportunity of a company agreeing or accepting its role as an acquisition target. Matching the combined offer to future needs of the market is just one of the parameters, important, but just one of them. Geography, finances, people, culture, all of those things are part of the mix. So while there is a pattern of acquisition that will continue, any specific comments about timing are more or less impossible. That means I'm going to end with the unthinkable for an analyst, a blank slide of predictions. But I think that's the truth. The clouds in the crystal ball do obscure the details. We have to live with the broad brush picture that we looked at just now. So that brings us to the end. Thank you very much for your attention. Now, looking at the time, I realise we have just run over. So let me check our question panel. I'm going to take just one question, I think. Let me just see what we've got here. And then we'll close. So, right, there's one question here which I think looks important, which is, David, this is for you. It's, what are the sources you use to find information?
Okay, so really for this particular chart and the work that we've done here, I'd say the main sources behind the research were really the sort of company press releases, annual reports, and conference calls. I'd say that was primarily the largest part of it. But sometimes there's lesser known bits or less publicised acquisitions that do happen. I mean, for one example, which is probably more of an interesting one rather than a more known one necessarily, was I remember looking and saw a forum where some people had announced, had rumoured that someone had been acquired, and then in chasing up through the company's websites and stuff, there was nothing about it at all. So eventually looking through sites like LinkedIn, where eventually it proved that all the employees had changed company at the same time, we'd been able to basically find out more about, actually, yes, they had been acquired. And then I think it was about half a year later, then it was kind of bits and pieces of this were then made public. But yeah, there's many different places, but generally I'd always say that the annual report and press releases are the main place to start, as well as the conference calls.
So always public information, but sometimes in slightly tangential to the main reports. You use LinkedIn and see what employees are doing. Okay, we've come to the end of our allotted time, so it just remains for me to thank you for your attention during this webinar. I'm sorry we haven't been able to cover any more of the questions. You can see our contact details on the slide there. We're always happy to talk about talk about the engineering software market. So with that, I will close this session. Until next time, thank you.